So our next presentation is by Judy Ruttenberg. Judy is primarily responsible for managing the SHARE initiative, which is building a free open data set about research and scholarly activities across their life cycle. While at ARL, she has also directed the Transforming Research Libraries initiative, which included responsibility for e-research and special collections working groups. Prior to joining ARL in 2011, Judy was a program officer at the Triangle Research Libraries Network, where she coordinated the work of TRLN's collections groups. She holds an MLS from the University of Maryland College Park with a specialization in archives and manuscripts, an MA in history from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and a BA from the University of Michigan.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm delighted to be on this panel and to have been here today. I've learned a lot. I also feel like I've been really well set up by just about every presentation here, so I look forward to our discussion and the rest of the panel as well. So that's who I am. As Tim said, I manage the SHARE project. SHARE, we've tended to sort of eschew our initial very long acronym, but it is Shared Access Research Ecosystem. Just as far as the title of this symposium here today, that was an acknowledgement of the many, many players and partners involved in this research endeavor. But we tend to just go by SHARE now for simplicity and branding, I guess. But these are the partners of that initiative. My association, the Association of Research Libraries, which is 125 of the largest research libraries in the US and Canada. Mostly academic, but not exclusively. Our Presidential and Provostial Association partners in higher education, also the US and Canada, AAU, American Universities, and the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And these associations came together to found this initiative in 2013 when a couple of things were going, big things were going on, big conversations. One, of course, was U.S. federal mandates for public access policies around publication and data sharing, data management plans, that sort of thing. So that, of course, that was a part of it. The other conversation that it tied into within these three associations was ongoing still working group around university investments in the institutional repository, which has actually come to include a focus on university press. So I'm really glad this is all together. But so that was sort of the intellectual framework of how, or the problem, that gave rise to this initiative. And then we found a technology partner in the Center for Open Science. So I'm happy that you heard from Sarah Bowman earlier. Center for Open Science, a true mission partner in this. The university, higher education's mission is to create new knowledge, to preserve it over time, and to disseminate it. We found a technology partner whose mission is to improve the reproducibility, integrity, and openness of scholarly research. So it's been a really fantastic partnership. I have to thank our sponsors. We are a grant-funded project. We're in the second cycle of a grant. Equally funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, with some in-kind contributions from Association of Member Libraries and certainly from the Center for Open Science. So our mission as a higher education initiative, our mission is to maximize research impact by making it research widely accessible, discoverable, and reusable. And again, I believe we share that mission with many of you in this room. What we're doing to fulfill that mission is to build a free and open data set about research and scholarly activities. So we've taught many of the speakers before me have touched a lot on different kinds of scholarly output in the research life cycle, so I don't have to really belabor that. But just to note that what we're interested in creating this data set, when we say it's free, open, and about research and scholarly activities, we're talking about aggregating metadata about research objects. We're not an aggregator of content. So why the free and open? Why is that important? I think as we can all agree that open access advocacy and policy, either on the institutional level, on the funder level, on the governmental level, has been more mature than our infrastructure and our ability to implement those policies. And we certainly are seeing that in higher education, certainly seeing that in the library and research office level. The notion that we need to connect funder to project to person to institution to et cetera, and make that publicly available just turns out to be enormously complicated. And we need a lot of infrastructure for it, and so, you began the day with ORCID and et cetera. So we believe that those standards, identifiers, code, platforms, APIs, all of this infrastructure that we need to implement these policies that people work hard for should also be open. This is a quote from Herbert van de Sampel in an article he wrote sort of reflecting on 15 years of interoperability among digital repositories. And I think we've been talking about this a lot today too, and I think this is a kind of aspirational quote. I don't know that we are well into a process where research activity is plainly visible, but I think that we all can agree after these presentations, including Phil's, that it's desirable that they be so. And that there's tremendous value in the contextual information and incremental information that's generated in the course of research. So I like it because I think it sort of describes the future state. But to do that, what we really are talking about are tools and services for an open workflow. And we're seeing, again, have seen some of those pieces here today. So our partner is the Open Science Framework. Sarah talked a little bit about what that is, a scholarly commons, a tool to connect pieces of the research workflow, the ability for a researcher to make any of the components of that work open or not open, including things like registrations and registered reports. But the Open Science Framework is also the technology within which the shared data set or database resides. So they're a technical partner, and they also, the tool of the Open Science Framework is a separate suite of services, inclusive of share. So why do we take a life cycle approach? Again, we've talked about this a lot today. And I'm also, somebody else mentioned having come from a 416 meeting in Portland, so where I was there talking about share and the FAIR data principles. FAIR data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that such principles should apply to, again, not just the published report, but to all aspects of the, all components of the research project in order, again, to facilitate reproducibility and transparency. Another reason, Jeff Spies is the co-founder, CTO and co-founder of the Center for Open Science. He's also the co-lead on SHARE. Finding, so, and this is sort of, I think, Travis's remarks really spoke to this. Finding somebody working on something early, you find a collaborator late in the process with some investment and perhaps some costs. We're talking about competition, and so you can really accelerate the pace of science if we can accelerate the notification of these incremental pieces of work and really give them life and exposure. So. So what are we doing in this? So the share icon in the middle, this sort of represents, this is a, I guess, representation of the data processing pipeline where we take, we harvest metadata from a number of different kinds of providers. Just a few of them here today, just to represent some of the diversity, a federal repository and Department of Energy's pages, the Vivo profiling system, some institutional repositories, Crossref, so these different kinds of places where these pieces of scholarly activity are reflected, deposited, and available for an open harvest, again, of the metadata, so that inclusive of a DOI that links back to that source object. But the squiggly lines are meant to represent the variability and condition of the schema and the identifiers, or lack thereof, or just what, the just incredible variability in scholarly metadata. So what SHARE is doing in its first instance, in its first phase, was to take this highly varied, inconsistent metadata, normalize it according to a schema which we developed within the working group, but consistent with other sort of industry standards, and output it in a consistent feed, or open API, or searchable database. So to any kind of, so to people who want to track research activity in that kind of real-time way. So as soon as something is deposited into a Figshare, into an institutional repository, into someplace, an archive, these are providers, then our harvesters query those databases nightly, and it kind of comes up and would show up in this feed, which with the presence of robust identifiers and the adoption of all these things would result in a really high value way to track research as it's coming out, people to find collaborators, et cetera. What we're finding, of course, I think to nobody's great surprise, is that in addition to normalizing that data, there's a lot of cleanup, enhancement, kind of imputing of missing values, and that's the second phase. This is the phase that we're funded in right now, is to really, really look at metadata quality, turning this into that high-value resource to feed those kinds of needs, and institutions' needs to know about their own research output. So if you go to cos.io/share, or our website is share-research.org, you can see just a very simple kind of user interface, and it will list the more than 100 providers that we are currently harvesting from to build the share data set, and there are currently more than 6 million what we call research events, which are really deposits into repositories that get, again, harvested or queried nightly and go into this. So I'll talk about duplication when I talk about specific technical enhancements that we're working on. But it's a big data set, it's a big open data set. So this is basically those 100 plus, 111 providers by type. Majority of them are institutional repositories, although the majority of the records, or the majority of the data, is really coming from places like Crossref. DataSite is a big one. Figshare is considerable archive. So even though institutional repositories, we have many of them, they're not contributing as many of the records. They're just not as big. But publishers, so I have publishers separate from metadata registries, because there are some individual publishers like PLOS that we're harvesting from. Others, other publisher information is coming through Crossref. So I put this on my slides even before I was on the panel with digital science, but I really like this quote from our panel. He wrote, and who is the CEO of Figshare, who wrote this article for a Share newsletter back in the fall. And it's basically, I think what Mark is saying in this quote is that in this kind of world where research is highly distributed and repositories are interested in data exchange, the way that we do that in the modern web is through APIs. What we're building here is a tool that can, I think, economize on the one-to-one relationships that repositories and profiling systems and tools and discovery platforms and all those things are kind of building for each other. Is what we're doing is building a piece of infrastructure, a data processing pipeline, where those things can come through Share. And then, as he says, give exposure to smaller sites, and I guess I would really include institutional repositories in that, that don't have the same exposure as a large kind of destination site maybe like Figshare. So Share's API is open. The code is open. It's all on GitHub. It's all the Share has from our website, share-research.org. We link to all the project documentation, meeting notes, code, etc. on the Open Science Framework. So that, again, that API is open for others to access that feed, however they want to parse it. Our lead developer at the Center for Open Science, Aaron Braswold, has developed a series of tutorials on how to query that API using Jupyter Notebooks, and those are available on our OSF project site, those tutorials. So there's a lot of work to do to harvest from 100 plus data providers, more coming all the time. The data needs a lot of cleanup. So one of the things that we're doing now, in addition, so we have this open API that Erin has developed these tutorials, and she's given some webinars targeted towards the kind of open source and library development community to try to get people involved. As Travis had also mentioned, the PubPub being an open source project, people can really just dive in and help. So this particular webinar was captioned and recorded, and Tim will have the slides right now. He's ready to go. But again, so I say that, we say we're partly doing that kind of outreach to the open source and library developer community, because when you look at this search or interface or interactive interface to get at the shared data, it's not that exciting. It may be, it's a kind of basic. And while our primary emphasis based on our funder and our grant is to clean, enhance, and link that metadata, we absolutely invite people to, jump in and help build discovery visualization tools that would be more sophisticated and interesting and serve consumer needs for that. Yes, exactly. So it's open source, if that can be. So that's our outreach to that group. And then the other help that's on the way on the curation front or on the sort of data quality side, which I'm terribly excited about, is we just announced, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, is that we launched this Curation Associates program. And so we've recruited 35 librarians in this initial cohort who will do some training, who will come to the Center for Open Science and do, starting in July, and this program will last a year. But they will get kind of technical training that we believe is, back to sort of harken back to Roger's transforming roles of libraries and librarians, technical skills that are really, that are in play right now in libraries as we build digital platforms. All tools that use will be open source. And then what those associates will do is spend time cleaning and enhancing and linking that metadata that's either in their repository feed going into Share or elsewhere in the Share data set. So they will work, it will be this kind of professional development and cohort experience and labor contribution, as well as a kind of train-the-trainer model where they might hold curate-a-thons or workshops or other kinds of things within their region. And I'm excited about this because I think we link some wonderful expertise in the library community in terms of structured data and metadata expertise with the kind of modern technology tools at the Center for Open Science. But then I think it brings up a lot of different opportunities and scenarios for using this big open data set about scholarship. I like my comments quote before that we need open data to study scholarship. And there are many, we work in universities, so many of, we have people who are very interested in doing that work if we make it available, if we make it open. So I think there are many opportunities for Share in that regard. So quick, I think I have like a minute left, but the technical work of Share going forward is to work on the schema to do exactly what we've been sort of talking about, looking at these research lifecycle activities, to connect components, to figure out instances of the same research activity and how they can be kind of rolled up and reflected, to model a conflict when there is that, and then really, really critically to capture the provenance and history across object versions, instances, etc. And then this last bullet, what I'm very excited about with our associates and with kind of more open crowdsourcing context is to model an interface to expose this open data set for sort of direct curation and enhancement. So to enable users, and we would of course build confidence and quality assurance on top of that kind of curation, but it's an exciting direction for us to go. Did I say there was a lot of work to do? There's a lot of work to do. It's a big, ambitious project. I welcome anybody's insights and involvement. We aim for inclusivity and openness in our working groups and in our community, and it's a community project. And so get in touch with me. This is a kind of a generic email for Share, and this is a link to our monthly newsletter where you can kind of stay updated on the project. So, thank you very much.